Bainbridge. I'm Stefan Goldby, President and CEO of the Bainbridge Chamber. Ahead of the upcoming elections, welcome to this community conversation with one of the candidates for City Council. In the interests of fairness, we are asking all candidates the same 12 questions, ones that knowledgeable chamber members have helped us write, though a candidate's answers may lead to individualized follow-up questions or requests for clarification. Each candidate will have up to 45 minutes to answer all 12 questions. None of the candidates have seen the questions in advance, and their answers will be presented in full. So, with all that in mind, I would like to say hello to a District 7 North Ward candidate, Ron Peltier. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get right into it. In terms of community engagement, can you just sort of detail the island organizations that you've previously worked for, with, or volunteered at?
Yeah, back in the 1980s, I worked with the local food co-op. And then later, I was a Little League coach on the Little League board, coached Little League and Babe Ruth. I was on the Babe Ruth board too, baseball. And I worked at the recycling center, and then I became a community activist when the Visconsi development came on, or was being reviewed at the city for approval in 2013. And then from there, I decided I was encouraged to run for city council. So I ran for city council, was elected in 2015. And I was on the council from 2016 through 2019 for a full four-year term. And so since then, I've been, I kept in touch with a lot of people, some of the council members, and I've been watching most of the meetings. And I'm really interested in what's going on in the city, because I think it has a big effect on all of us. And I think you would agree with that.
Absolutely. So as you've been now actively campaigning and talking with islanders for a while, what are the top 3 concerns you're hearing from the community, and did any of those surprise you?
Well, not too much. I mean, a lot of people are concerned about land use and water, and do we have enough water? What kind of land use patterns are we going to have? People do not want a lot of people have said they don't want the police defunded. So I've heard that, and because that was one of the things that when we incorporated in 1991, that was one of the things that people were concerned about, is that we wanted better police service than we got through the county. So that's something I heard. It was a little bit of a surprise because I didn't remember that, but my memory's been refreshed on that one. A lot of people houses I went to, a lot of people they don't seem engaged really with what's going on. And I love it when I meet somebody who's got an opinion about something and they want to talk about it. So a lot of stuff, but I'd say the top 3 was probably land use issues, water, land use growth issues, water, and the police. Probably, I would say might be the top 3 there.
So the recent draft that came from the countywide land usage report suggested that the overall growth was on track to hit the projected 2036 levels, but the growth itself was not happening in line with our community's stated comp plan. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I do agree with that. And I've been a big proponent of shifting some of the density from the conservation area of the island to basically to Winslow. And the way we could do that, the best way I think would be through a transfer development rights program. And we've talked about that at the city. When I was on the council, it was there, we're going to do this. But maybe you've noticed sometimes it can take a very long time to do things at the city. Other times it can happen in one meeting and be very surprising. But that is something that I know there's a council member now that I've talked to a lot and kind of worked on it a little bit with her, the TDR program, and looked at the one they have in King County. And she was hoping to get that done, but her term's going to be up. So I think sometimes council members are surprised when they realize how long it takes to get something done. But that needs to happen. The having more growth in Winslow especially is in line with the transit-oriented development, which is a new concept in the Vision 2050. That's a regional plan that Puget Sound Regional Council adopted, I think almost 2 years ago. And I helped work on that. I was on the Puget Sound Regional Council Growth Management Policy Board when that was being worked on. And it's in part a strategy to address greenhouse gas emissions by having people located closer to high capacity transit stations. And ours is the ferry terminal. And plus we have bus traffic, and when people, buses, and when people live in Winslow, there's a lot of services there, and it's a very walkable area, closer to downtown you are. So it makes a lot of sense to have more growth in Winslow and less out in the what you could refer to maybe as the suburbs if you look at us as a kind of a small county. Some of the council members took exception with that a narrative, kind of sticking its nose in our business. But I think it was I thought it was a thoughtful narrative that was right on. I think we need to find a way to have more growth in the center, especially Winslow, and less out in the hinterlands.
So that leads to a kind of obvious follow-up question. So then what do you think requires the most urgent update in the current Winslow master plan?
That's a really good question. I haven't thought about that. I haven't looked at that master plan in a long time, but I think it needs to just anticipate, it's kind of interesting that I don't know if they're going to work, the council going to work on that before they actually work on the new comp plan. It's getting to the point where the new comp plan review is going to be starting. So really the comp plan and the Winslow master plans kind of go together, but I think we need to find some ways to, like I said, like we were just talking about, getting more growth in Winslow and doing it in a way that doesn't destroy the small town feel of Winslow. And that's a little bit of a trick right there. Smaller units, housing units is one way. There's a move to have less parking and encourage people not to even own cars if possible. So, but I would like to see it tie in with some of the stuff that's in the regional plan about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also retaining the character of Winslow. So that's about all I got on the Winslow master plan, but I think it needs to be thought in conjunction with the comp plan, because it really is an appendix to the comp plan.
It's really about sort of balancing the residential, commercial, and community civic needs with preservation of natural resources, right?
Yeah, and I know you're familiar with the hotel, and I'm not going to be surprised if I get a question on that, but there were some issues brought up with the hotel, and one of the issues is whose downtown is downtown. I know that a lot of the merchants want as much foot traffic as they can get, because the more people that come in their stores, the easier it is to make some money, pay their rent, and have a little left over. I would like to see the Winslow master plan address this issue of whose Winslow is it? I mean, it's really all of ours. And I've seen it go through a lot of transformations over the last 56 years that I've lived here. It used to be a real sleepy little town, and it was just for Bainbridge Islanders. Very few tourists, few people would come on the 4th of July, but we had 2 hardware stores. And at one point we had 2 or 3 auto parts stores. So it was a very working class community at that time. And it served our needs. It wasn't oriented towards tourists, but now we have that balance. And I think most people accept that. I think that needs to be addressed in the Winslow master plan, is that balance between Winslow being for Bainbridge Islanders and also being a place where people can come to visit, come off the cruise ships, whatever, come over for the day. So I'd like to see that addressed. And I'm not sure exactly how we do it, but I think there's a way to have some good policies and goals in the Winslow Master Plan to address that.
So COVID has prompted an unprecedented shift really in the operations of the island's businesses, of nonprofits, and even the city services themselves. What parts of that pivot do you think will become permanent changes, and how can the city best support that change?
I think that what we're doing right here with a Zoom meeting, I'd like to see more of that. Now, I do think there's value in in-person meetings. I think the city council maybe has suffered a little bit from not having in-person meetings. You've become you're too distant to the people that you don't know and socialize with on the council. I never experienced that. We didn't, COVID came after my term on council, but I'd like to see these remote meetings be used, especially for meetings where we're expected to drive to Bremerton to a Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, Plan Pol or Transpol meeting, something like that. Maybe mix in some remote meetings and have some meetings that are in person, just so you can get that, the stuff that happens at an in-person meeting. So that's one of the things I'd really like to see. As far as wearing masks and all this other stuff, I'd like for that to go away, but it doesn't look like it's going away right away. So I think that Zoom's been a big revelation, and there'll probably be other online meeting platforms that are going to come along. But I think it's something that we talked about. Let's reduce our carbon footprint by not having to drive to so many meetings. And now we've experienced it, what it's like to do Zoom meetings, and they actually work really well. In some ways, for some things, they work better, because right now we can share a screen, we can show each other a document, and a little bit easier than if you're in a meeting, you got to hand it around or put it up on a screen or something like that. So I think we discovered a new tool that I hope we'll use, and I think we will.
One of the biggest current challenges for the island's business community is finding new employees. I mean, not just our community, but our country, basically, and possibly the world. One of the biggest struggles those potential hires consistently point to is a lack of affordable workforce housing in our community.
Yeah.
What practical steps would you propose would you be prepared to take to address the island's need for workforce and other kinds of affordable housing?
Well, I do think that we need to look for any opportunity in Winslow where we can build some affordable housing. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any way we can earmark it for workers, as a workforce housing. Now, maybe one of my things that I'd like to see the city do is have a lobbyist that goes to the state legislature and bring our issues there about taxes, about affordable housing. And one of the things I'd like that lobbyist to say, how do we designate, if we create affordable housing, how can we designate it for workers? What mechanism can we consider for doing that? But I don't know if you know about the Wintergreen project up at Wisconsin. I think that's a great opportunity to potentially get some workforce housing right in the middle of where there are retail outlets. I mean, McDonald's, Ace Hardware, the banks. You got Rite Aid across the street, then the grocery store, Safeway. It's close to schools. There's a park across the street. There's transit. There's a non-motorized trail. I don't understand. There are some people at the city who don't think it's a good location, and I think it's a perfect location. I was one of the activists who opposed that development because I didn't think we need another shopping center. And I think now that would be a very good use, is to have some housing there. And I was disappointed that a majority of the city council wasn't willing to enter into some kind of a development agreement with the developer to help make sure that project happens, because that's a huge opportunity for a substantial amount of affordable housing, 31 deed restricted affordable units, and then the rest of them are going to be affordable to some extent because they're small units, and so their market value is going to be less. It's going to be more like your condominiums that you see across the street there and near the Safeway. They usually have the cheapest prices on the island. So I'm not for big projects out in the conservation area like at Suzuki property. I think that's a wrong place, but I will support when it's at the right place. And Wisconsin is the right place. It's already developed, and like I said, it's close. It checks off all the boxes for where you want affordable housing. So yeah, we definitely need some workforce housing, and there's our opportunity. And the city has also stepped up. Council the other night, they decided to help HRB with 550 Madison, that project that Cutler and Anderson are doing there at the northeast corner of Wyatt and Madison. So that was good, but that's only 13 units, $2 million, 13 units. And they put some other money just as contingency of 1.7 million too. So I support all that. Let's just make sure we put it in the right place.
How do you think we can best help equity and diversity be increased on Bainbridge?
Well, some people say housing, so they want a lot of density everywhere. I'll agree with some additional density, like I said, in Winslow. I don't agree with island-wide increases in density. I'm concerned about our water, the sustainability of our aquifers. I think one of the first steps in this, I was one of two council members that went to a meeting, one of the first meetings before we had a race equity task force. And what I heard was that people of color were they weren't feeling wanted, or they weren't feeling welcome on Bainbridge Island. Because not all people of color are in need of affordable housing, for example. But what was missing was a sense of understanding that they didn't feel welcome in the community. And for me, that's the first step, is to talk about that. And for those of us who just take for granted feeling welcome, maybe understand that going out of our way to welcome somebody a person of color or whoever who doesn't feel welcome, and you don't really mean for them to not feel welcome. So it just means going out of our way to do that. That's one of the important things, is to listen, to have these dialogues about race and equity. And one of the issues that was brought up was just having people of color having access, knowing about city government, opportunities to be involved. And since that time, this was it was about 3 years ago when that started. We now have a planning commissioner who's African American. We have we already had Rasham, a Palestinian American, on the city council, but now we have an African American there in Brenda Fanfroy Johnson. So I think we've made some progress. I'm not sure how I think we just need to keep talking and dialogue and be open. And we're going to have some differences. Some people are going to want to put density out at Suzuki or somewhere, and I'm not going to agree with it, but I'm still going to want to talk, and I hope they will too, so that we can talk about it and get more comfortable with each other and understand where we're coming from mutually. So
you've already. Oh, go on.
Can I add something?
Of course.
I'd like to add that in 2016, I sponsored the Indigenous Peoples Day resolution. I worked with the island's Inapino community and with the Squamish tribe to make us 23rd city in the United States to observe Indigenous Peoples Day. So I believe in racial inequity. I believe in recognizing that our tribes having good relationships with our local tribes, and we live right next to the Squamish. So it's not a new thing to me, and I'm really proud of being able to work with our Inapino and local Squamish tribe to get that, to sponsor and get that approved unanimously by the city council.
You've talked about water, so I'm assuming that'll be one, but what kinds of infrastructure improvement is most needed on the island?
I think that non-motorized are probably the most needed. Now, I know that there's an issue with electrical reliability on the south end. And now a lot of people are working from home now, and they're discovering that it can be really disruptive if you're working from home and you can't rely on electricity and you have to have a generator. So that sounds like that really does need to be improved, and it creating a bit of a conundrum. We don't have a lot of control over the electric grid. We can, I think the council speaks as in a unified voice, we can influence PSC, but I'm not sure what the options are. They don't want to underground. And so there looks like there may be some impact to people who have a new high power transmission line going by their house. But for me, I'm really concerned about non-motorized improvements. We've talked about them. They've been, there was quite a lot of fanfare for the non-motorized transportation plan that was approved in, I think, 2004. And so we've had all these, talked about all these things that we want to do, and we've gotten some bike lanes built and some paths. But still today, if you go up Blakely Avenue from Buckland Hill up to Blakely School, there are no bike shoulders. And that is bizarre because there's a nice wide shoulder on the side of the road that's not paved. It could easily be paved. And it's just strange to me that we haven't got around to that. So that is one of my priorities, is that I think we need to figure out a way to find money and to have more basic facilities for bikes and pedestrians. And that there's a little bit of disagreement about that right now. But I think we need to do it. We can get the most most bang from our dollars with, and that's shoulders on roads. So that's what I'd like to see us focus on.
What do you think the overall trend of falling enrollment in Bainbridge's highly rated and well-funded public school district is most indicative of?
Well, it would be hard to say it doesn't have to do with the price of housing, because we've seen housing prices go up and up. I did read recently that enrollment went up this year. And so perhaps there's more young families with children that can, are doing well, and they can afford housing here. I know when I was doorbelling, I saw a fair number of school-age kids and younger families, an awful lot of older people too. But so hopefully that the islanders in childbearing years with kids are going to be able to afford to live here. Some of the affordable housing that we talked about earlier, like the project at Wisconsin, that'll help. Hopefully there'll be kids who will be there. So I really think it has a lot to do with housing, and and I think it's important for people to know that we can't just wave a magic wand and influence the price of housing. We really can't. I mean, a lot of it's market driven. Like opening up the island for a lot of development. I'm not convinced that would make housing significantly cheaper. I think it would just make for a lot of expensive housing. So these projects like 550 Madison and Wisconsin, and and also preserving some of the other affordable low-income housing we have. And hopefully this year is a trend that will continue with more families with kids being able to afford to live here. We'll see.
Should Bainbridge take a leadership position in reducing waste, educating consumers, and promoting reusable items in our community's everyday life? And if so, what are your key initiatives in that area?
I don't have any initiatives in mind, but I do believe that we should do that, and that we need to. I think one of the things that we learned from the plastics ordinance was the importance of talking to our local businesses who are most affected by things like ban on plastic forks and covers for cups and that sort of thing. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was working at the recycling center back in the 1970s and later. So this is something that I've felt strong about for a long time. In our household, we try to minimize our plastic waste and reuse things, reuse plastic bags. And it's hard, but it's hard to do. And the state is, some of this is at the state level. What they're doing is they're going to gradually require more recycled content in plastics that are sold in Washington State, sold and used in Washington State, with the idea of helping to create a market for recycled plastic. Now it's happening too slowly, but it's happening. I hadn't anticipated any kind of initiative on my part, but I think it would make sense for us to be talking and have somehow have a regular way to an ombudsman or somebody like that who's talking to the business community, because what'll happen, things will happen at the city and the business community kind of seems like they're blindsided by it. And we don't want business owners to have undue influence, but still we need to be communicating with them because I think that, part of the selling point of Bainbridge Island is we're more progressive and more and green. So the more we can minimize waste, it just bolsters our reputation. I think it's good for business if we do it in the right way. So, you've got me thinking, maybe if I get elected, that'll be one of my initiatives. What I like to do, when I was on the council, I had a list of stuff. This is things I want to work on. And I look for people to work on with it. And I'd be doing my research and looking for an opportunity to bring it forward. And so, there's a lot of stuff. It's just when you're on council, there are a lot of things that are going on. And but I'm glad you brought that up.
So maybe with that list in mind, there will only be limited time and resources to tackle the challenges of Bainbridge life on council. So perhaps you could think and name 1 to 3 specific actions that you would love to potentially define the legacy of this potential new term in office.
Yeah, the city just kicked off the groundwater management plan project a couple of weeks ago. And that's something that I advocated for about 7 years ago as a member of the public and during the comp plan workshops, was that we needed a groundwater management plan. I was aware that they have one on Vashon Island. And we need one. There's agreement on that, but what it's going to look like, there's a term and concept called safe yield. And that's where you basically preserve the level of water, groundwater in your aquifers, and that way it allows your wetlands and streams to still function normally. So that's something that I would like to be known for, along with other council members, that we worked on and approved a good groundwater management plan that's going to protect our water security and our critical areas in our wetlands into the future, in an uncertain future with some record drought that we've had. So that I would like to see us make some progress on traffic concurrency and specifically developing levels of service for non-motorized transportation and making it part of the concurrency certification for new development. I think that would light a fire into the city. I think they would get a lot more interested in building non-motorized facilities if that were a limiting factor for new development, because the city has a built-in bias for development. And if development were impeded by a lack of non-motorized facilities, I think we'd see a natural drift towards more funding for non-motorized. So the water, the comp plan is coming up again, and that's one of the reasons I want to be on the city council. I would like to see us preserve, and I was around for the last update where the council gets the final word. I would like to see us improve our comprehensive plan to be more internally consistent. We knew that it wasn't at the time, and that's something I had an issue with, but I'm not, one council member doesn't decide what, you have to compromise, and you have to be, you got to be part of the sausage making, and sometimes it's not pretty, but I like to see a comp plan that was more internally consistent, to maintain our emphasis on environmental stewardship and just protecting the quality of life and the character of the island, but still addressing other issues we have. And I think the key here is that we need council members and members of the public that are partnering with our council members and serving on the advisory bodies and boards who are up for the challenge of innovating in finding creative solutions to things. And I'll give you an example of something. When I got onto council in 2016, one of the things that people were really concerned about were clear cuts. There was a lot of clear cutting happening where a developer building on a residential lot could clear the lot from the whole thing. They could take all the vegetation. And that was a vexing issue for a lot of people. And so I got on a committee with 2 other council members and a couple of planning commissioners, and we worked on that issue for a couple of years, a year and a half, before we found the solution. And we finally figured out how to use low impact development, which has to do with stormwater, and aquifer recharge, and specifically is included in the critical areas regulations and identified by the state as a critical area, critical aquifer recharge areas. And we took a lot of work. It wasn't obvious how we're in, but all these pieces fell together, and we found, I believe, the only way to legally require the retention of native vegetation on the island. So that is the kind of creativity and innovation that we need going forward. We need council members who will roll up their sleeves and take on these challenges and do so over a sustained period of time. Focus on an issue that needs to be, the whole thing with the transfer of development rights. Somebody needs to, council members need to focus on that and have a few things that they want to do. Focus on that, do their homework, look at how it's done elsewhere, and just keep pressing on it. Otherwise, what happens is just all this stuff that you talk about, and the city has a huge work plan. There's a lot of stuff on their work plan, too much. And you just end up spinning your wheels. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You talk about it every, 3 months, and you don't get anywhere. And after a while, it just falls by the wayside. So I think, so I've kind of veered off of what you asked me, but that would be another thing is I'd like to see the city and the city council better at managing its work plan, to be realistic and to be better in touch, in tune with its limited bandwidth for actually getting things done. So that it doesn't think it can do more as an institution that's really going to get done and does a better job of prioritizing things.
I think you've given me a nice segue into the final question, which is what kind of working atmosphere will you strive to create if elected to city council?
I want one where people, sometimes you get on a board or a group, you may not like everybody, but you got to remember that everybody on there is elected, generally speaking. Sometimes you have appointments, but they all deserve to be there. And whether you like them or not, you got to work with them. And to set aside all the politics, personal stuff, and be able to listen to what your colleagues have to say. And when somebody has a good idea, give them credit. It's the idea that counts. It's not who thinks of it. And to really focus together and elevate the way you do your business. Sometimes I watch council, I'm a little disappointed in process. So I have some ideas about process, how it can be improved. But I think it's just set aside personal feelings and politics and focus on getting good things done for the community. And that means listening to community members, listening to your colleagues, and working with community members too, as well as your colleagues. So that's what I would hope. And when I was on the council last time, I did work with my colleagues and members of the public. A lot has been made of my relationship with the former city manager, but we actually worked on stuff together. He wrote a landmark tree ordinance. He took on to do that, and he consulted with me and another council member to get that done. And so, and when I was the deputy mayor, we got along fine. I mean, we had a history of stuff that had happened, but we set that aside. And that's what people need to do, is take your personal feelings, if you have an issue with somebody, and put it in a little box somewhere off to the side. You don't have to forget about it, but just set it aside for now. and focus on getting good stuff done for the community.